Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Youth Pastors Podcast. My name is John, and this is Garrett Thor Belcetis. He was my youth pastor, then my first boss in ministry, and now we are building this together. And we're going to answer questions, shorter episode, hot topic, something I get asked all the time, a tale as old as time. Should middle school and high school students be separate? Should there be separate experiences for middle school and high school, or can they coexist? Should they not coexist? Garrett, you go.
Oh, man. I've seen it a million ways from Sunday, I feel like. We've seen both of these. We've done both of these. And I feel like given the year, given the wave of the school, like, dear God, man, I don't know. But I think some of the largest momentum we've ever had is when we've been willing to put them in the same room. It's crazy things happen. It's difficult to navigate and organize, but it's probably some of the largest growth and booms we've seen is when we combine that momentum. Part of it is probably because we were so unified in a way, being able to go, okay, this is how we can move the whole thing forward. But I do think it says something, just like we talk about wanting generations to help generations. I feel like my mic's really loud.
Oh, it sounds good to me.
It's good. All right. So I feel like maybe with generation to generation, how beneficial it is to have good, healthy high school students a few steps ahead of the middle school students. Also, when we're in that same room, I don't know, this is a whole other talking point. I'll let you speak to this, but we always spoke to the high schoolers in the room and we called the middle school students up, whereas some people are worried about the engagement of middle school, so they speak down to the middle school. Like, there's just so many weird dynamics that go into that room. So let's figure out which ones to unpack and let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the other, like you said, especially if you're smart starting off and your attendance is small. I mean, if you have 12 kids, you don't want to split those people up. You want to build some critical mass, and you want to that is important to an environment. I would say always have age-specific small groups or discussion groups. I think that's easy. I think that's the other thing is when people are asking, should they be together or separate? My question is normally like, yes, because it just breaks down. We've seen success doing camp separately. We've seen it together. I think I'll start by saying one of the parts about it that I don't like, Garrett, because I think it's very excuse based, is when our high schoolers just don't want to come anymore because the middle schoolers are there. And so you think that what's going to spiritually mature your high schoolers is taking the middle schoolers out of the room, and then just magically everything's going to get better. I think that's probably my least favorite one, the reason. If your high schoolers don't like it, disciple them, Yeah,
the amount of youth pastors or people that I oftentimes want to just throat chop, right? Oh, you're called to work with middle school. I'm just not called to that. Or, like, how difficult it is to work with a middle school student. I'm like, what the heck? Which also tells me when your students are saying that, you don't have a dynamic problem. You have a culture problem. And I think that's something that culture, if you didn't create that, that also means you're not the one creating the culture in your group. That's a whole nother conversation, but you need to get that junk in line.
Yeah. So, and there's a difference. There's a difference between like that to me is giving into preferential mindsets, which I don't think we should be doing in disciples. Now, sometimes though we do stupid things. We're like, yeah, youth group, or we're doing this big event Friday night at 7 during high school football season because we're going to raise some non-preferential students. No, it's like, no, that's just us being combative. Like, we're just being unwise. Like that kid has football. Those kids want to, like that's not creating a preferential ministry. That's us being unwise. But I do think, like, man, if your junior hires can't raise their hands to Jesus when there's 8th graders around, what kind of soft type of Christian is that? Like, now I could see on the other side of the coin, hey, some of my middle schoolers don't like coming to a more high school dominated environment, or parents don't like that. Well, again, I would say that's not a dynamic issue. That's a culture issue. It probably means that your safety, security standards are not up to snuff. If high schoolers are being that overtly wild and physical or chaotic, that's not,
smoking in the parking lot.
yeah, like that.
That's a conversation I had a million times, right? As a parent being like, hey, there's a teenager out there smoking. Like, okay, we'll go have the conversation. But the more that you can prevent those mindsets by having better security, by beefing a lot of those things up, I think that is really helpful. It deters a lot of, it's kind of like living above reproach, right? It's setting your group up to be above reproach, that you don't want to run into a lot of those issues because you have navigated ahead of time by preparing your teams and building people to be, positioned properly.
Yeah.
I've never met a group of middle school, John, that doesn't want to be around the cool high school kids. I've seen it the other way around, right? Where you have some high schoolers, they're like, oh, the middle school kids are in here again. But typically they're leaders. Like you can go down the list of culture things, could be like, I think there's a root issue here versus actual.
As I was imagining you having that conversation with the parent, it just made me reflect on your influence on my life, because I'm like, you're probably the reason why, right, wrong, or indifferent, why my initial response in that situation would be, do you want to come with me and talk to them? Or, or that would be a you thing that I picked up. Or the other one would be like, should I call the police? Or like, what seems to be your primary concern? Like that, that I feel like that's all you, man. But I'm glad I'm that way.
Yeah. It's also, I mean, we're inviting the world to come experience Jesus. Why are we unhappy when the world shows up?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
It's parents.
Yeah.
Always. We are both parents. So like,
yeah.
I get it, but also those are the conversations I'm having with my kids.
And I think there's
even at the age of 10 of 8. Right?
I think there's a fine line being a parent where I don't want church to be a sheltered place, but I do want it to be a safe place. And I think that's actually a really good way of saying it. Thank you, Holy Spirit. I think it's the best way I've actually ever heard it said. That's cool. I like that. I don't want to. I don't want church for my kids to be a sheltered place. I do want it to be a safe place. And I think a sheltered place means, oh, no smoking. No, like I like that my kids get around all types of different people. I like that. I like when one of my daughters comes up to me and says, this kid said this, or this kid has 2 dads, or this kid has 1 leg, or, I'm like, these are all great conversations, like this is good for my kids. And it's good for us as a family to talk about this. And if we don't talk about it as a family, and even if I could successfully shelter them, one day they will experience it and not know how to handle it. But then I see on the other hand where I go, I do need it to be safe though. I do need to know that there are measures being taken, that my kid is not going to be shown porn like haphazardly, or that something's going to be watched, or a song's going to be played, or that she's not going to get hit, or hit without someone there to help her. Like, I think that's where we ride the line. But I would just encourage you, do everything you can to make sure that your youth ministry is safe. But when a parent comes and you can tell they want their kid to be sheltered, you need to lean into that pastoral conversation, like Garrett is saying. And honestly, you need to pastor that parent in that moment. It's not the kid. It's you need to help unpack with them what they mean by that. And again, that's not going to happen in one conversation. That's going to check the box in your head of going, wow, Stacy, if the Martins are going to be a part of our youth ministry, we're probably going to have dinner with them a couple times. And that's what good pastors do. We don't just write them off as the haters. Oh, they're just haters. They're not on board with the vision. I'm like, no, they just need a pastor. Imagine a pastor has to pastor.
Dude, and I think that's just it right there. That is it. It's getting involved in the messy conversation. And most people want to avoid the mess. They want to avoid the drama. They send a security person out there to talk to the parent instead of going, how am I resourcing and equipping parents to let them know what's happening during our experience on a weekly basis, that they feel safe, that they feel great sending their students, sending their nieces and nephews and neighbors and everybody else, that they're like, man, this place really is great. We need to fill a van full of kids and bring them here. How am I doing that to the parents? Because there's been plenty of seasons of youth ministry where I did not do that well. And you're now fielding a bunch of different parental conversations because they're like, is this just a party? What is this? And you're like, I did not communicate well. What's happening here? It's where it really is the gospel.
I'm laughing.
So yeah,
I'm laughing because my camera froze. Maybe this is the Holy Spirit telling me, but I don't think so. I think it's the enemy trying to stop me. This is something that's a little bit easier to say now that I'm not on a church staff day in and day out. But the phrase, we're going to get a bunch of kids and put them in a van and bring them over here. It's like the church is like the only place where that sentence is a good thing, you know? Or like, I remember one time at Elevation, we had an amazing presentation from the local police about like grooming, which is something that you should ask your local police department to come in and do a training with your leaders. It's such a good liability thing, and it's a good thing in reality. But all of us, as they were describing grooming, were like, oh God. We're like, there's a real big fine line between being a great youth leader and grooming. And you're like, frick, this is attention, dude.
Okay, but I know we're joking about that, but in all reality, dude, isn't that why you want to go on the offensive in working with parents so that you can build that trust, that you can equip them with the know-how? Because a large part of that training is understanding how gatekeepers work and the people closest to your kids.
Yep.
And so you want, I sure as heck am going to make sure that I'm very secure in any life group leader, coach, instructor, teacher that's involved with my kid. That's my responsibility as a parent to make sure that my kid is safe, even when they're not in my house.
Yeah.
So the more that someone or an organization or an experience, a church can come to me to explain those things while they have my kid, the more it puts me at ease and trust.
Yeah.
So now that means you as the youth pastor, if you're sending leaders out and leaders are spending all this time, you better be knowing your leaders really, really well, unless you ever want to have to navigate those situations when a leader has crossed a line or a leader has impregnated a student, or like you go down the line of those things. Not saying it's ever happened, but dear God, it happens all the time around this country. It happens with teachers to students, to middle school teachers, to middle school students, to pastors, to like every dynamic. That stuff exists in every dynamic. So how are you safeguarding yourself? Yeah.
And let me tell you, just having separate experiences for middle school and high school does not mean you have an inherently safe youth ministry. And I think we are all guilty of doing things that have the appearance of excellence without doing the things that have the effectiveness of excellence. And a lot of times what we do is we create placating strategies of like, no, they're separate. Or, we sent out a guide to our leaders of what not to do. Okay, but is there a follow-up accountability with the leaders? You know what I mean? Well, they all have background checks. Okay, but are all of our leaders being discipled? And I just think that a lot of times splitting middle school and high school feels like this magic, pill, silver bullet. And it's just not often not. I will say this on the solution side, Garrett. I'd be curious what you have to say about this. Looking back over our time together where we kind of mostly had the extremes between, or I guess maybe the best was when we had what I'm about to describe right now. I just think it's seasonal. I think if you think about this is the biggest challenge that youth ministries are facing. And I never, ever, ever hear anyone talk about this, Garrett. It's one of the biggest challenges. I don't know if it's the biggest. We want to give kids from the time they are in 6th grade to 12th grade the same experience, the same games, the same songs, the same room, the same sermon, like no wonder they tap out by the time they're in juniors, or why from 8th to 9th grade they tap out, because like more of the same. And so I think that where Fortnite's doing monthly updates and artists are dropping more new music than ever, and sports is giving them an opportunity for promotion or travel or new experiences. So I actually think, Garrett, one of the ways to manage this tension is also baked into it is a really exciting solution to keep youth ministry engaging, which is some parts of the year, have them all together, embrace the chaos of double the size and what are the topics that fit for that? But then embrace the specificity of creating something a little bit more unique when you're talking about sex or relationships or, whatever, call the subject, I think that there's just more of a rhythm than a rule is really healthy. Because then the other thing that we saw with that is one of the things that really helps middle schoolers transition into high school is when the first time they see the high school leaders and students and youth pastor is not when they're transitioning. There's such a healthy thing when there's a little bit of merge. And so I think that also could solve by combining them at the right times during parts of the year. It keeps youth ministry fresh, and kind of gives something best for both age groups.
Yeah, I think one, it's well said, John. I think it's very almost hazardous to the development of the individual to keep them in the same program for that many years. The same program, the same room. When really what we're worried about the most about this individual is their development, is their spiritual development along the way. But we don't introduce new things to grow their development. So I think development is monster and key. I think bridge systems are super important. I think that we'll just do a separate podcast on healthy bridge systems from elementary into middle school and middle school into high school into young adult life, young professional, stuff like that. But yes, no, I think there's two key factors into what you're talking about. And one is creating monumental events versus monumental moments.
Mm-hmm.
So a monumental event, I think, is killer, right? You look at something like See You at the Pole, maybe a summer camp, things where you can combine for this massive energy and it's growth. There's like just kind of explosive moments, but then more of a intimate monumental moment that the student is going to remember with maybe it's this keepsake we gave them about this point, and they're going to go home and put it on their shelf forever. But it's more of a intimate conversation, so it's more age appropriate,
Yep.
right? So it's not a together moment, but it's a developmental moment because it gets them from point A to point B.
That fires me up, and it just makes me think too, Garrett. We'll end with this on a cliffhanger. But just like, there is something cool about Vacation Bible School and old school Sunday school and even old school Boy Scouts of badges and honor. I just think in youth ministry, we massively underestimate the power of some of those transferable moments and marking progress and like helping kids feel like they're like letting kids stand apart. I think there's really something to that, like you said, and it doesn't always have to be big to be monumental.
Yeah, I think an underlying factor is here's one of the biggest downsides is when you stay separated, you don't ever bring them together. Is the only examples you have for your 8th graders are authority figures.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times you have more misbehaving middle school students when they're only surrounded by authority figures and not examples. When you can bring them together and they can see how to properly act because there's high schoolers ahead of them, but in the same space, they have to figure out how to pull it together because they're not the kingpin in the room.
Yep.
They're not the cool kid in the room. In fact, they're looking to go, oh, that's what I'm stepping into. Like there's a natural more leadership that's not an authoritative figure that can help support you as the leader and youth pastor in that room. So I think that's a huge key play to make sure that they have those times together so that they can see who is, looking ahead since they're following behind. So
yeah, no, I think that's great. Sorry, I was texting my wife at the end of this episode, guys. We're just guys doing real life in ministry. I was paying attention to Garrett.
How dare you?
But yeah, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Should middle school and high school be separated? And just remember, on this podcast, we are going to help you guys talk about the what and certainly the why, but the how, the who, the what, the how, the who, the where, the when, all of that happens within our coaching environment or our youth pastor mastermind, our youth pastor academy, which you guys can access and be a part of at theyouthpastors.com. The reason why is because there's so many nuances that are specific to each leader, each church, that a podcast alone will not be enough. So if you guys are hearing things that we're talking about saying, man, how do I apply that? How do I measure that? How do I really build that? We want to help you build that. And if you feel like our podcasts are ever lacking, we agree with you. This is the gateway towards what we really want to do, which is help you guys build flourishing systems, a flourishing culture for the middle school and high school students of your church. So this has been another episode of the Youth Pastors Podcast. We'll see you guys next time.